Hi everyone, Paul here from FamilyWheels.ca with another car review for your growing family. And if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, you might remember that about 18 months ago we had the new Honda Civic sedan when it was just released on the channel. We loved that thing. It performed really well, great fuel economy, nice performance, great value for your money, and as a result I said that hey, if it came in a wagon version, I would buy it tomorrow. Well, guess what? For 2017, a hatchback has come out. Not quite a wagon, but certainly gives you a little bit more utility and versatility in this hatchback equivalent. This really rounds out this 10th generation Civic very nicely because we now have a sedan version, we have a coupe version, we have the Honda Civic Type R new for 2017. This really gives you a crazy sport tune version of this hatch that we're driving around this week, and then also this more basic hatchback, which does come with a turbo on all trims as well. But am I going to have to eat my shirt here this week? Let's hop on board and see if in fact I'm buying the Honda Civic hatch at the end of our test drive. Well, a lot of times when I get a media car for evaluation, I get the top level trim of the vehicle, but Honda's actually passed on the LX trim here in the Civic hatch this week, and that's the bottom of the line trim in this vehicle, but it actually demonstrates something that Honda has really improved upon over the last couple of years, and that's standard equipment. Even though I am in the base model here, which starts at about $21,500 in Canada, we're getting a lot for that money. Yes, you can get into an LX trim of the Civic sedan for a couple $1,000s less, but all trims, no matter what, get the 1.5 liter turbocharged engine in the Civic hatch that we see in higher level trims of the Civic sedan, as well as in the Honda CR-V for 2017. And that means that you've got a really peppy yet also very efficient engine coming standard on all trims of this vehicle. But you're also getting a 7-inch infotainment system with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard. You're getting a rear backup camera. You're getting automatic climate control, although not dual zone. That comes on higher level trims. You're getting heated front seats. You also have a really nice, clean, uncluttered look here on the interior. I raved about this with the Civic sedan when I was in it a year ago, and the same goes here in the hatchback. We only have a few buttons here on the dashboard for climate control. Otherwise, you use this 7-inch infotainment system screen to do most of your commands. Some people complain about the fact that it's all digital, that you have to use a touch screen and you'd rather have physical buttons, but I think that Honda's done a nice job here of giving you the buttons that you're going to use all the time for adjusting temperatures and that sort of thing as physical buttons, but then cleaning things up by giving you touchscreen options as well. And if you really don't like to adjust the volume using a touch screen, then we do have volume controls as standard right here on the steering wheel too. And while this does feel like a fairly premium cabin, one complaint that I have are the buttons on the steering wheel, which kind of feel really chiclety under your fingers. They feel a little bit cheap and they don't quite line up with the rest of the cabin in the Civic hatch. Now bump things up a notch to the sport trim and you get a sunroof, you get dual zone climate control, you get sportier bodywork on the outside, you get keyless entry and a push button start, and perhaps my favorite feature in the higher level trims of the Civic hatch is the dual center exhaust, which I think looks just amazing. You don't get that here on the LX trim. Then when you bump your way up into the top of the line touring trim, you're getting things like heated second row seats, leather seating surfaces, a wireless charging station for your smartphone, and LED headlights as well up front. That is one thing I've noticed night driving with this thing. The lower level trims don't have particularly strong headlights, so if you're doing a lot of night driving, you might want to bump up into the higher level trims. But in general though, I'm really impressed with just how well kitted out this car is. Very competitive when you compare it to the other vehicles in this segment, like the Mazda 3 hatch or the Ford Focus, or if we look at this compared to the Volkswagen Golf. All of those vehicles have upped their game when it comes to standard equipment, and Honda's definitely playing along with that trend as well. One thing that is bothering me in the interior of this car though, and it's something that you have to go for a longer trip to experience, are the seats in this vehicle. The foam doesn't quite offer enough support. The cushioning isn't quite good enough, and it means that after a couple of hours driving around in this thing, I could definitely feel my butt kind of tiring out. Speaking of the seats, here on the lower level trims, there's no lumbar adjustment. So if you've got a funny lower back and you want to get things dialed in just the way you like, it's not even an option here on the LX. Now, before we get to how this car actually drives, I want to touch quickly on the looks of it because I'm really torn on it here this week. There are times where, depending on my mood and depending on the angle that I look at it, it either looks amazing or I think that I'm not so sure. The front end, I think, always looks good. It's sporty, it's muscular, it's aggressive. It looks much wider than the vehicle actually is. It's a bit of a trick of the eye, but the back end, this hatch on it, kind of makes it look almost like the Civic sedan is growing a tumor and it needs to be, lopped off. Now, I've heard from people who really like the look of this car, and I think that when you do have that dual center exhaust that I was talking about in the higher level trims, that it really kind of sets the back end off in this thing, and it does look kind of cool. I'm kind of on the fence with it still. I'm not quite sure what I think about the back end looks of the Civic hatch. Now, when it comes to the driving experience here in the Civic hatch, just like the Civic sedan, I'm really impressed. Based on the same platform, Honda's put a lot of thought and time into this thing, which means that it's quiet at highway speed. I'm averaging at about 62 decibels at 100 kilometers an hour with our decibel reader. I'm also cornering really nicely in this car. It's very composed, but I'm still not feeling all the little bumps like I do in some more sport-minded sedans that I've been in. And it also has a really excellent engine on board. This 1.5 liter turbocharged engine comes on all trims of this vehicle. Even under quick, steady acceleration, I'm not feeling like there's a lot of lag going on. I was expecting that when I drove this engine for the first time last year because it is so small. Now, here in our tester, we have the optional continuously variable transmission. You can get all trims of this vehicle, even the touring trim up here in Canada, with a 6-speed manual as well. You can only get the touring down in the States with a CVT, so it's nice to have that option up here in Canada. But unlike so many other CVTs out there, which I'm still a little wary of from some brands, it's one of the better CVTs that I've come across, and it keeps the sporty feel of this car alive. My one downside to the sort of sporty experience of this car is the fact that it doesn't have a great engine note. It seems like the CVT kind of has it drone along. It sounds uninspired and a little bit sluggish, but that's not its personality. So sound and personality are kind of different in this car. But here's something I wish this CVT did have, because it is fun to drive and it does feel a bit sporty. I'd like to have paddle shifters on the steering wheel, or at least a Tiptronic function on the gear shift itself. It means I could gear down into corners, play around a little bit more, and get that sporty feel out of this car just that little bit more. But then here's the thing with the Civic hatch. You're driving it along, maybe pushing it a little bit like I have been here this week to get a feel for this car, and then you glance down at the fuel economy readout and it's still really amazing. So Honda says that here in the LX trim you should average between 6 and 7.7 liters per 100 kilometers. I'm averaging right in the middle, 6.9 liters per 100 kilometers here this week. Now you also have this economy button down here, which, if I'm honest, does zero favors for the fun to drive aspect of this vehicle, but really does work. It helps bring your liters per 100 kilometers right down, and it's one of the more effective economy buttons, which sometimes don't really seem to do anything at all that I've seen out there. But one area that Devin and I commented on as soon as each of us jumped into the driver's seat of this thing is the steering feel, which Honda has managed to make feel both stiff and numb at the same time. It almost feels like, I was trying to come up with an analogy, it almost feels like I've been driving around in a pit of gooey marshmallows. It's really disconnected, and considering how nicely tuned the rest of this car is when it comes to suspension, when it comes to the transmission, the engine, it's just a disappointment to me that the steering feel isn't quite as sharp as I'd have hoped. Now, in terms of safety, we don't yet have results from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety specifically for the Civic hatch, but Honda's pretty confident that this car should achieve exactly the same results as the Civic sedan because they share the same platform. But if you do want to really up the ante and go for some of those computerized safety systems that do help keep you safe, things like adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, lane departure warning systems, forward collision mitigation braking, all of those systems come on Honda's sensing package, which you can get on all trims of this vehicle. Now, speaking of keeping your family safe, the Civic hatch has best-in-class legroom in the second row compared to the rest of the competition, like the Hyundai Elantra GT and the Ford Focus. So let's jump in back there and see how it stacks up. Well, while the Civic sedan and Civic hatch are based on the same platform, the sedan is actually just a little bit longer, and the result of that is about 1.5 inches more legroom for second row passengers in the sedan version of this car. In the hatch version, it's a bit tight for me as an adult if you've got a tall driver up front as well. So it's 6'2". When I adjusted the driver's seat to the way that I would normally have it, there was no way I was squeezing in here. So I've adjusted the driver's seat for someone who's more like about 5'10", and you can see here that now legroom's doing just fine. I've actually got more than enough here, a little bit of space to spare. So the moral of the story here is that if you're somebody who's a bit taller, don't expect rear passengers to be particularly comfortable in this car. Headroom, meanwhile, though, despite the fact that it does have one of those sportier sort of slanted roof lines, is actually pretty good in this car. And it's when car seats get put in it that I'm also fairly impressed with what we're seeing here. Front-facing car seats have been okay this week, but it's actually rear-facing car seats that were the biggest surprise to me. Because for a smaller hatch like this, you flip this kind of average size convertible car seat that we have around, and we still have, according to my measuring tape, from the back of the front seat cushion up to the glove box, about 29 inches of legroom. That's actually significantly more than that Kia Sorento 7-passenger SUV that we were driving around last week. And a big reason for that is that the glove box slopes off rather dramatically, and it means that you've got extra room for your shins, where many other vehicles have a more boxy glove box. So when you do have rear-facing car seats up here, or you need to slide that passenger seat way forward, that they're going to be jammed up into it. At 6'2", I was still a bit pinned, but nowhere near as uncomfortable as I expected to be. That was a real surprise in this car. Now here in this LX trim, pretty basic second row, as well as the sport trim. It's not going to be that much different. We have cloth seating surfaces, and I do have to add that we do have animals in our family, a cat and a dog, and whenever I've stepped foot in this vehicle this week, I've trailed in a little bit of animal hair, and these cloth seats are like Velcro for it. They're really tough to keep clean. If you bump your way up into the touring trim, the top of the line trim, you're going to get leather seats as well as heated second row seats, and if you're thinking about having something that's easier to wipe down, that might be a trim that you really want to consider. Now let's take a look at the trunk capacity in this car. Compare it to the Honda Civic sedan. You've got about 300 more liters in this hatchback, but to be honest with you, it doesn't feel that much more utilitarian. We can only fit our standardized trunk test in here really with not much room left to spare. I don't really see much point in going for this hatch for that extra little bit of trunk space, because it's got such a slanted rear window on it as well, that it means that, you know, putting the family dog back here, they're not going to have enough headroom. Putting taller items is going to be trickier as well. What's interesting here is that even though the Honda Fit is a much smaller hatchback in the Honda lineup of vehicles, I actually find that its trunk in many ways is much more usable. It's got a boxier back end, a taller back end. It means that you can fit a family dog back there. In many ways, I'm disappointed about the trunk here on this vehicle and the fact that it doesn't offer you just that little bit more utility that I was hoping for. Well, of course, the big question you're probably wondering here is, am I going to buy the Honda Civic hatch now that I've driven around in it for a week? And the truth is, no, I'm not. And that's for a few reasons. The first up is that life has changed a bit since I reviewed that Honda Civic sedan. We now have a travel trailer for camping, and it means that we need something that can tow it, but still offer a little bit more of a car-like ride in the city, and our Volvo station wagon is the perfect fit for that. Our Volvo station wagon is also great because it does give you a bit more of a car-like ride with excellent utility. You can stow a lot in the back of that thing, and that brings me to my second point here in this car, and that's that while it is a hatchback, I don't think it offers you that much more versatility or functionality when you compare this to the sedan. Now, speaking of towing, next time I see you, we're going to be taking a bit of a family camping trip in the Ford Raptor. This is the off-road oriented version of the F-150. We had a chance to drive it around an ice course in Quebec a couple of months ago, really put it through its paces. This time around, we're going to see how it does as a tow vehicle. That's in about 7 days from now. Until then, have a great week and make sure to check out all of our reviews at familywheels.ca.